Please can you raise your hand if you remember your dreams? So I'm talking about in the morning when you, quite a lot of us, okay? Quite vivid dreams? Quite vivid dreams, yeah, okay, perfect, thank you very much. Please can you also raise your hand if you've ever experienced somebody sitting on your bed, or someone sitting on your chest, or that kind of paralysis just before sleep. Okay, not as many, but still a few. Doesn't need to be the Grandad from the Workers original advert, okay? It can be anybody. And finally, please can you raise your hand if you've ever seen what you think might be a spirit, or a ghost, or an entity, or something otherworldly. Okay, so again, not as many as the first amount, but the reason I asked you that question, and thank you very much for sharing, is because really the point I'm trying to get to is we all experience as humans visual experiences, don't we? And they do overlap. And really the point is that there are many different states of consciousness, visual perception, and experiences that we can have. And that's something that unites us as humans. But it is worth pointing out that it's very different person to person, isn't it? For some people, they might not even remember their dreams in the morning, and then other people, can go full channeling and all that lovely stuff. So, as Gordon said when he introduced me, I'm Adriana, Rigi Sicilian, born here, half Sicilian. And today I'm going to talk to you about hypnagogic hallucinations and hypnagogic state. But it is worth pointing out that, as a child, and before and after the main hypnagogic thing that set me on this course, I have also, had experiences with the likes of maybe a grey I saw, I wasn't sure, or, maybe a ghost, or, precognition, that kind of thing. Now, today, I did have some videos for you in the thing. It doesn't appear that they're working, right? We're not worried about that because, unfortunately, you just have to listen to me talk a bit more. But I have made a documentary about this subject, and the documentary looks at this from really 360 angles. We talk to neurologists, but we also talk to spiritualist mediums. Today, because we're here at the Symposium, I'm going to focus on the metaphysical with you, so things like space-time overlap and sacred geometry, things like that. I was very excited to share with you a 14-minute video later on with JJ and Desiree Hurtak. Now, they are from the Academy of Future Science, they're futurists, and they've got a wonderful segment where they talk about space-time overlap, sacred geometry, the alpha frequency, and all the rest of it. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear that we can get that today. However, it is in the documentary, so I urge you to. That's on YouTube, and I'll give you the link for that later on. So, what is hypnagogia? Well, in a nutshell, it's a transitionary stage that happens between being asleep and awake. We all sort of experience it of a sorts, okay, but for some people they maybe just bypass it really quickly. For others it's something really quite tremendous. It comes from the Greek word hypnos and agagos, and essentially it just means leading into sleep. So the thing with hypnagogia, today after this I'm going to tell you my inciting incident which Gordon touched on. But it gets downplayed quite a lot, this state of consciousness. And I don't really like that. I'm not a fan of that because it gets downplayed in the same way that dreams are sometimes dismissed. People say, oh, it's just psychological or it's just mechanical. I don't believe that. I think there's a lot more going on in our inner worlds. And we might just not have that empirical ability to prove it right now, but if you look at history, that's a very human reaction for a lot of things. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. There was a Hungarian doctor called Ignaz Semmelweis, okay, and I don't know, has anybody heard of him? He's not that famous, but sadly, he was actually the pioneer of antiseptic. Okay, so he used to work in a maternity ward, and he noticed that the patients that the doctors dealt with, there was a really high mortality rate with the babies, okay? But the nurses, the midwives who were working in the other ward, nothing untoward there. So he's thinking, why is that? And actually, what he wrote a paper on was the fact that at that time, people didn't believe that bacteria could be spread person to person through touch, okay? They believed that it just came through your breath, miasma. So it was just something that was in the air, foul-smelling clots, things like that. But he said, well look, I'd like you to wash your hands with this antiseptic with lime and chlorinated water and just see if it makes a difference. And the birth rate went down from 18% to 2.2. Now, you'd think that would be enough to say, oh, there's something in that. I can't quite see these bacteria that you're talking about, but I think there's something in that. No. In the 1800s, this was pre-Pasteur, pre-Louis Pasteur, because Louis Pasteur actually proved it, okay? He had the experiments to actually prove it, but poor Semmelweis did not. He was just going on this intuition that he had and patterns, looked at patterns. He was dismissed, he was ridiculed, he was rejected from the medical community. He ended up being put into an asylum by his colleagues, where sadly he was beaten up, and in 14 days after getting an infection, ironically, he died. Okay, that's just one example. Even today, right, there's an astrophysicist called Adam Rice. I pronounced that wrong, Adam Riess. And he won a Nobel Prize for essentially discovering dark matter. And he is now challenging his own theory, and the whole scientific community is against him, even though he's won the Nobel Prize, because he's found some more information about the expansion of the universe that doesn't quite add up. And being a scientist, he wants to look into it. And people are saying, no, the old guard is what's right, So the point I'm trying to make here is that as humans, we do have this thing of we like what we know. But we're pioneering all the time, aren't we? And the talk today really is about, it's going to mostly be about consciousness and the fact that we are really only scratching the surface of that and what we are capable of as humans. So to bring you right into Rome here, this is, I was staying at the Hotel Mediterranean Hypnagogia on Via Cavour. I had a meeting the next day. I was just newly graduated, writing down my notes, all excited and stuff. Put my notes down, went to go to sleep, and just as I'm relaxing into that sort of relaxation alpha state in my bed, I goes to make the turn, I open my eyes, and there in the dark canvas of my room on Via Cavour was this boy flying towards my face. Now he wasn't, it was all good feelings I was getting from it, but it was very, very frightening because it was the first time that anything like this had happened so vividly. He had beautiful blonde curls, he was smiling, and I said a couple of choice words, ran and put the light on. I thought, what was that? I'm 22 years old, surely I've not just lost my mind. What on earth just happened? Now, I sketched, please don't laugh at this next slide because it's my drawing of what I saw, right? Okay, so I'm no artist, right? I'm no Van Gogh here. But he did have a body, he wasn't disembodied, but the reason I wanted to show you like this is I could actually see the outline of other things in the room, so my eyes were open, but obviously we'll talk about this later on about where the imagery is coming from, but my eyes are definitely open because I could see everything in the room, and if you've experienced this, you'll know you do see other things in the room with this other stuff on top. So this was him smiling, coming towards me. Thankfully we've got the eye now. Now just a couple of things about this image just to point out, disclaimer, I didn't look like a Victoria's Secrets model in my 20s, right? And I wasn't in the habit of sleeping at the bottom of the bed either. The hotel was good, but I didn't have the view of the Vatican and the Colosseum. This is AI, right? The lights were off, and the boy didn't have wings. But other than that, I thought this actually was quite a good depiction. The video is working there, but just maybe volume. So that's kind of what he looked like, right? So you imagine that, you imagine seeing something like that, and then the next day having to go to this meeting and act all normal, right? So what I've got here is you'll recognise Michelangelo's fresco there, The Creation of Adam. And the reason I've chosen just to pop that there is not because I'm saying that night I was like, oh, I'm so special, this angel's come to see just me and I'm going to save the world. No. But to describe the feeling of it, guys, the feeling of it, it does make you feel, when they're positive like that, it does do something to you. Like, this is more than just a dream. You know, this is something that actually feels, it transcends, you know, that kind of human to be it divine or otherworldly kind of feeling, do you know what I mean? So I chose this because obviously it happened in Rome, which was a coincidence. As I say, I was about 22 at the time. Now, this isn't a plug, right? I'm being coy here, right? I'm just saying this because the next slide is my book, right? But, but the point I'm trying to make here is, from this one solitary experience, which by the way happened loads of times, it still happens now, but it's never the same thing I see twice. I don't know if that's the same for you guys. It's never the same person or thing I see twice. But what fascinates me is from that one experience, I literally wrote a novel, a sci-fi novel, a visionary fiction novel if you like, and an entire world was born out of this one interaction. And it just shows you the power of creativity that can come from something like this. You know, it doesn't necessarily need to be a negative thing. It can be scary. I'm not taking that away from people because I've interviewed a lot of people who have unfortunately not had a very nice time with it. But you know, it can be a positive thing. It can be something that lets you explore different elements of your imagination in your mind that you didn't know possible. So, what sort of things do people report seeing? Well, I've got a little, I don't know if the volume's going to work, I'm going to give it a go. But I was on a podcast here with Vincent Waller, who does a podcast called Caledonia Elixir. He talks about global affairs and the paranormal and things like that. And he asked me this question, so let's just see if it works. No, it doesn't work. So, that's okay. So, oh gosh, what am I doing? That's frightening. Right, we'll go back to that. So, essentially what I say, it's a 2-minute video, but essentially what I say in this is that people in the beginning, so this is taken from speaking to a lot of people that have this, you know, and I think we can all probably do it, right? We definitely can all do it.
30 years.
And
in the beginning,
interrupted by myself, that's the first, okay.
You know, it could just be things like what a visual psychiatrist would call a simple hallucination, so like a blob or an orb kind of shape or patterns, simple things. And then what a visual psychiatrist would call a complex hallucination is the more formed figures. Now, I believe very much in an interdimensional, multidimensional kind of side of things, which we can go into later. But yeah, to kind of put it in practical terms, a lot of people describe seeing kind of either spiders or shapes or patterns, kind of usually very repetitive hypnotic patterns, the sort of things you'd see under a microscope, or the stuff that's under the sea, you know, kind of these biological sort of patterns. But then there's a lot of people who see what you could describe as beings, and they can come in all different shapes and sizes. For me personally, I see, they look like humans to me. They don't tend to look alien-like to me. The ones I see are human. They are always smiling at me, and not in a creepy way like the film Smile. Not like
Nicole from Pennywise,
Yeah. And you know, I joke about it, but actually I need to be sensitive to the fact that some people do get quite terrifying ones as well. You know, so I am, you know, I do feel bad for people that have that. And I get jumpy ones. Sometimes I get jumpy ones because, you know, you imagine you're in your most vulnerable state, at your most relaxed, and it's the last thing that you kind of expect to see intruding into your reality. But for us who experience hypnagogia, it is just something that happens as a natural, the mechanism is falling asleep.
So that's kind of the point there. For this particular type of hypnagogia, the mechanism is falling asleep. That's not the case. Some people can induce it, you know, and obviously you have people who are far more tapped in. So if we are the equivalent of like the transistor radio that just accidentally taps into it through falling asleep, the likes of your psychic mediums I see are the fibre optic broadband, you know, of that kind of thing. So this is what I was saying at the beginning of it. I think we all have that in us, but how it's kind of channeled and how it's developed is maybe just slightly different levels with all of us, just like our skills or abilities and different things. Sorry about this guy, just a couple more of these. Saw this guy once, saw these guys. No prizes for art here. This was geometric patterns that were moving across. You can see I've drawn the bed because I could see the bed and this was going across my bed. Some more patterns there. In 2012, one of the Von Trapp kids decided to come visit me for some reason. Again, you can see from behind him. And like we've seen in the video, it kind of starts off sometimes, you might see these blobs or, you know, really lovely kind of things like that. It's very technicolor. Spiders. Now, this is a huge one because everybody I spoke to saw spiders and I like patterns and I thought that was interesting. Quick show of hands here, anybody who's seen spiders? 1, 2, 3, don't be shy, 4, 5, 6. Okay, sorry if there's people that don't like spiders, I apologise for that. Okay, so not so many here, but with people that have this very vivid, non-induced hypnagogia, spiders always come up. It's something that doesn't seem to have a place in the bedroom, and whether you're scared of spiders or not, it's going to get your attention, isn't it? One of the girls, she used to see things that were actually in her room behaving in a way that they should not be behaving by the laws of our physics in this 3/4th dimension. However, that's not to say that this isn't perfectly normal in a different dimension. This was just some guy I saw one night. I didn't tell Tom about this, my husband, but no. And you know, and you can see colour. Well, I can see colours, and you can see things written on. You know, it's very detailed. A lot of people say they see people in period dress, and this has actually came up with people who had Charles Bonnet syndrome, which is a degeneration of the eye. So they actually had less use of their eyes altogether, and they were reported seeing during this hypnagogic state experience. Orbs as well was another one. You know, a lot of people said sometimes they had an emotional sort of feeling towards these things that were in the room. Now, this one is probably the most accurate depiction I can give you of how it is for me personally. Always so lovely. They don't appear in a puff of smoke like a magic trick. You know, you're kind of stirring, you're just about to let go, you open your eyes and they're in situ and there they are, and this is what it's like, this is what it feels like, for me. This is just a wee video of Margie, one of the girls in the participation, and it's just something that happened to her. Okay, she booted that, whatever it was, she booted it right in the face. And she's smiling here, you know, because it's familiar, she knows what's going on, she's worked out what's going on. But you imagine, some people actually have hurt themselves doing this. You know, they've got out their bed so quick, they've hurt their head, you know, because those muscles that are normally paralysed, suddenly you're sort of in this still transitionary place, the body's awake, and you can really hurt yourself, so that's not so good. So we're coming now more into the metaphysical kind of consciously bits, right? So what's a liminal state? Well, I'm going to let Adam Powell, a humanities professor from the University of Durham, tell you if this works. Oh, any volume? Okay, no volume, doesn't matter. Essentially what he's saying, and I hate to talk over him here, but he's saying that, you know, again, the liminal state is something that presents itself in between us being conscious and unconscious, being awake and being asleep. And we have found, you know, through historical texts and everything else, there's lots of interesting stuff that happens here, like really interesting stuff. So that's what he says in a nutshell. That brings us nicely on to this book by Jennifer Dumper, Exploring Consciousness at the Edges of Sleep. If you're interested in this subject, I would highly recommend this book because Jennifer's main takeaways from it are, again, this is not just an on-off experience. It's not a binary 0-1 thing that's happening to us every night here. And she encourages you to actually try and linger there if you can, you know, tonight. If you're in bed, I don't know how you sleep. Some people sleep well, some people don't sleep so well. Some people, their head hits the pillow and they're straight out. I'm very jealous of you. But, you know, because sometimes if you do have an important thing the next day, you don't want to be like heart racing, like, oh my gosh, I just saw The Matrix, like what was that, you know, it's a lot to try and sort of deal with. But yeah, so she's saying, you know, there's a spectrum of things going on, like try and linger there just as you're dropping off, like just, and the thing is, for people that have hypnagogia that's not induced, you're not, you know, there's not a conscious thought of like, I'm going to open my eyes, I'm going to see something. It literally catches you when you're at your most vulnerable, when it's the last thing that you're expecting to see. And I don't know if there's, you know, obviously something in that. It's not a station, it's a destination. So rather than, if you look at consciousness, unconsciousness is the, you know, the two trains, get off the train. Try and linger there, go and have a look around, wander, you know, and see what happens for you. Finally, it's really good for practical tips if you're interested on inducing it, hypnagogic dreams, active imagination, that sort of thing. It's got all that in it, so yeah, I highly recommend that. Okay, these are brain waves. The numbers down the side here, essentially, they are how many cycles per second your brain wave is going around. Okay, so we've got the gamma waves. That's typically, you would experience that, you know, like your Zen Buddhist monks can get into that state. Channeling, people, they put electrodes on people who are channeling spirit guides. They're going into, and there's other weird, interesting stuff going on there, but that's a whole other talk. And also, they found it when people die. You know, just as you're dying, they see these gamma waves. Beta waves, hopefully, unless I've bored any of you to sleep, we should all be roughly in the beta waves stage right now here ourselves. And this is the interesting bit. So when we go to sleep at night, we first hit alpha, the alpha frequency, and then we go into theta, which is slightly deeper, and delta waves, we're off to the dream super highway. But in between this stage is this hypnagogic state of consciousness. Now, for the untrained person, it's probably relatively quick, like 5 to 10 minutes, right? That's why people probably barely notice it, unless you have little boys flying towards your face, which gets your attention. But you can stretch this out with training. I've actually never tried. You know, what happens to me is enough, and I love it, and I enjoy it now. But you can, if you're disciplined, which I'm not, but you can, you know, you can sort of train yourself to really stretch this out longer. And there's all sorts of wonderful things reported in this state. So yeah, this is kind of where it tends to happen. They have put electrodes on people at this stage, and they can't quite explain what's going on. The brain waves are going mental. It's chaotic. You know, there's lots of different things kind of happening. So it's a really interesting kind of state of consciousness, and that's where it sits. I want to just read you just a wee snippet from Jennifer's book, because I think it kind of surmises it quite nicely. So she says, think of the conscious mind like the land, known and solid, and the unconscious mind like the ocean, deep and largely unknown. At the threshold area where the ocean and the land meet, the waves become churning and wild. That's where people surf. Similarly, liminal dreaming is where you surf the edges of consciousness. So it's this thing about the boundary zones, about there being something really interesting happening as humans in the boundary zones when we are going from, like, you know, one kind of experience sort of into the next. If Jennifer's book is the contemporary guide, this guy's work here is the actually first book written on the subject in 1987. And it's quite academic, okay, it's not an easy read, but if you're really digging it and into it, want to know, you know, his workings, I think it's part of his thesis actually. Again, he was shunned a little bit for this in the medical community, which is a shame. And now he's still alive. I have tried to meet with him a couple of times, but he's a bit poorly, bless him, and he lives in London, and he's not, you know, doesn't want to meet just random mad Scottish girls, just call them. But the 4 takeaways from this book is he sort of says, look, for him, this occurs in 4 stages. You've got maybe your lights and your colour, your faces, your nature, autosymbolic phenomena, which is like a technique that you can practice, and hypnagogic dreams, which is another thing that you can actually sort of teach yourself to do. And as I say, he goes into great detail for that. So what triggers it? Just a little snippet from one of the participants from the documentary now.
And you've mentioned that you feel that things like certain stressors might trigger it, like anxiety.
Can you hear that?
You know, when you've got a lot going on in your waking life. Is there anything else that you think might trigger one of these episodes?
Yeah, so besides the stress triggers, I do think the meditation, there was a period where I was doing really good about doing a guided meditation every night before bed. And then as the guided meditation faded out, it would play like meditation sleep music for like an hour or so. And it seemed like every night that I listened to that, at almost the same time or same point in the recording is when it would be triggered. I don't know if that was the time of night that it was, if it was a certain frequency that it reached in the music, but I did notice a lot of consistency with that.
Okay, so that's interesting for her. She'd listen to this music and then at the exact same point, now what's going on there? To me that's the brain frequencies. She's tapping in at the exact same time with something there. Now, I'm going to sandwich this next little bit for you. So I'm going to just quickly talk about the downsides, then there's going to be the video from the heart attacks, which hopefully will work, and then I'm going to sandwich it with the advantages of this, phenomena. Okay, so downsides, shadow people. Now, again, AI, I asked for a fedora hat, I don't know what that, if you want to talk about that. This happened to me in a caravan. It was really not nice. It can be quite imposing, the negative ones, because let's face it, we live in a world of positive and negative forces, yeah? Well, why that should be different, in our reality and in other dimensions, there's an argument to say these things, it's a common force across, all time. And another one that differs from, sometimes, and one of the neurologists said that sometimes there is a sleep condition where your brain, if you go into deep sleep too quickly and you go into REM sleep too quickly, some of that formed kind of narrative dreamscape can come into your waking reality. But what they can't explain is this weird phenomena of kind of isolated objects and people and things. They can't really explain that, but this is kind of one of the, sometimes there is a bit of an element of danger with it. Right, my favourite bit, the metaphysical, right. I'm just looking at the time, but hurry up. Okay, so like I say, we've got this video where the heart attacks are going to cover these subjects. Consciousness, space, and overlap, alpha frequency, sacred geometry, higher realities. Okay, hope you're ready. But within the video, there's a wee bit of AI, and unless I just go through this, it might not make sense because it's just kind of overlapped and it looks a bit daft. Problem solving, right, there was a German chemist called Kekule, you might have heard of him, the Ouroboros, right, he was dozing in his chair and they basically just found benzene at the time, it's the residue of the gas lamps, and they were trying to figure out the organic structure of it. They were like, what does it look like, and basically he was trying to figure this out and he was sleeping in his chair, he was in that hypnagogic, half awake, half asleep, and suddenly he saw the Ouroboros, the snake, originally it's the dragon, sort of eating its own tail, and he's got it, eureka, that's the way that it's arranged like that. Now, historians say he made this up to make it sound a bit more kind of cool, but whether it's true or not, Dali, Salvador Dali, Thomas Edison, all these people report having extreme inspiration through their drawings or their workings out, problem solving in this particular state, which is cool. Okay, without further ado, please relax, and I think we've just about got enough time for you to listen to the heart attacks. Again, if you don't mind just checking the volume.
I'm Dr. And I'm an international author and educator, and my interest has always been in understanding consciousness, how that works, why are we here, where are we going from here. I've also had a background in the environment.
I'm Dr. J.J. Hertog. I'm a social scientist, a researcher in linguistics, archaeology, space science, cosmology, and spiritual philosophy. So I bring together really a whole academic spectrum of knowledge regarding our importance as emissaries of light. Humans who are waking up to their cosmic potential.
What is consciousness?
Many people believe that consciousness arises in the brain. That is not my research nor my opinion. Consciousness seems to be part of a universal field, and the way we see items and events is we tap into that field, which helps to give us information. For the most part, we don't activate enough of our abilities to really know who we are and what we can do with that. And many people talk about the global consciousness field. But from our research, that of my husband's and myself, we actually can tell that there's a universal field. For example, with remote viewing, Ingo Swann was able to see, and he was one of the best remote viewers, rings around Jupiter. And no one believed him in 1973 when he saw this. But in 1979, when we sent probes there, yes, they said there's rings around Jupiter. So it's the understanding that consciousness is not related to just us. We filter information, we filter the field of what's going on around us.
Consciousness is a term that scientists are still beginning to grapple with. Many years ago, my wife and I had the privilege of working with scientists at Stanford Research Institute here in California. We published a book called Mind Dynamics in Space and Time, which is really the top secret program looking at the powers of consciousness. And so some of the illustrations and documentation here is considered to be the X-Files, the real hidden story of the power of consciousness, written with Dr. Elizabeth Rauscher, one of the foremost female mathematicians in the world, who wrote more than 400 scientific papers and who was considered a candidate for the Nobel Prize before she died.
There's a real question whether space and time really exist. Scientists are even looking at this right now, because in actuality, people have seen things that are going on in the future. We call it, of course, precognition. And they've also seen things that have happened in the past. Amazing. There's been a lot of tests, both at the University of Colorado Boulder, in analyzing the stock market, seeing whether something's going to go up or down. And even with amateur, what we call remote viewers, they've had 100% accuracy. One of the top remote viewers was Russell Targ, and he was playing, we'll call it, in the silver market. And he made lots of money because he used some remote viewers that told him exactly what was going to happen in the future with the silver market. And it was also 100% accuracy. So we can know the future. I would say we can't know maybe way out into the future because there's free will. And we do have that ability to choose our direction in life. So it's very hard to determine long-term relationships and long-term circumstances. I believe this is important for our future as well, because people would like to predict, well, this is going to happen and that's going to happen. But you know what? If we change the way we think, we change the way we view life, then that reality, even for the whole planet, because we can do it collectively, can also change. We use what we call the left side of the brain, the logical mind, mostly when we're awake. But when we're going to sleep, our brain shifts. Now, it always has these different frequencies, the delta, the beta, the alpha. But basically, when we're going to sleep, we're moving into an alpha frequency state. And when we do that, we're starting to lose that logical, hard set, intellectual mind. And the creative side, not only of us, and that's why I think some people see images and pictures, because their creative side is getting more activated. But in addition to that, with the alpha frequency, we can kind of shift from what we would call the third/fourth dimension, which is space and time, to working in other dimensions. My work with remote viewing has shown our brain can actually operate in 8 dimensions. And some of this has been confirmed by the Blue Brain Project out of Switzerland. They saw the neurons acting in our heads, and it actually showed that we are actually operating in beyond just what we would logically think of in the third/fourth dimension. So, do other beings exist? Absolutely. Why don't we see them? And we'll go from everything from ghosts to extraterrestrials to angelic powers. Well, we don't see them because we're stuck in this logical mind. And when we relax that energy, when we move more to our insightful self, we start seeing other realities. They do exist. They just don't exist where we can physically see them in this 3-dimensional reality.
The importance of understanding what is called paraphysical phenomena, such as beings or ghost-like energy forms that one sees, for example, during the night cycle, is an indication of the greater ontology of existence, that the mind is problem-solving at night, things that it doesn't understand during the daytime, with all of the information, the interactivity of individuals. Sometimes, during the night cycle, the mind begins to catalog and co-create a deeper interpretation of what it doesn't understand in objective reality. So the subjective reality can be a springboard for good as well as negative associations of how we understand these holographic or bioholographic life forms or appearances. In short, we are always swimming in the sea of consciousness. It should not bother us that we see in our sea of consciousness everything from the yellow submarine to sharks to extraterrestrial phenomena. It's all there in some fashion. If we are to look at the global heritage of what poets, scholars, and thinkers have recorded down through history, we're no different than our ancestors thousands of years ago who wrote abstractly or metaphysically of several of the realities we see during the night cycle, which has to be fully understood and appreciated as we now go through this great leap forward in consciousness understanding.
What do the visual geometric patterns of moving objects represent?
Well, everything is geometry. Our whole body is a living geometry, and it's constantly moving. We only see ourselves as a solid form, but if you look at the inner cells of our body, even our brains, things are really in geometry. Now, first and foremost, in the universe, I believe, was consciousness. Higher consciousness levels that came down into our third and fourth dimensional reality. But in actuality, when we're going into that sleep state, we're starting to see what could be called the matrix. And I do believe there's a matrix, not so much like a movie, but like the flow of life, that you have a certain vibration and you move into that vibration. Everything is vibration. One of my books that I wrote with my husband is called Sound. Literally, everything is these frequencies. Now, you think sound is just something you hear in your head. It's not. There's the whole study of cymatics, and that is sacred geometry. So sacred geometry is sound. Sound is sacred geometry. In some of the Hypnagogia experiences, they actually hear sounds. Others see geometry. Technically, it's all the same thing. Sound is geometry. It's all one. So basically, you're using parts of your inner mind, parts of your inner visualization, because you're not seeing anything with your eyes, and you're tapping into, I would say, the matrix of life.
The question is sacred geometries, and my wife and I have written a series of books in linguistics, musical linguistics, called The Names of God. For example, this which I'm holding up, Salvator Mundi, the Savior of the Earth, goes into the descriptions of geometric forms, circles, spheres, vortexes seen by artists that have illustrated this book. So this is part of the natural vocabulary that we have, the line, dreams, and color. Language over the years has suppressed this until recent times. We began now in the 1960s and 70s to understand that it is a natural principle of life to understand that everything is in mathematics and consciousness, and it's the blend of the two that helps us decipher the meaning of a circle. It could come from an archetypal symbol of living near an Indian reservation of indigenous people. It could come from understanding the triangle, because we have within our brain what is called peripheral brain cells. That is to say, the geometry is built into the wet layer of our brain. It could also come from watching too much television at night, where there are bad symbols, and one goes to bed with a sense of negativity, suppression, or oppression. I, my wife, however, feel that we must think always of the positive, and we must be part of that 2% of humanity, always thinking of the positive, because there we can solve things more quickly. There we understand the spiral of life that we're connected with, the ongoing dynamics of the universe, and we as a micro-universe or universe within the universe can put the two together for meaningful purposes and interpretation. And finally, we're moving into a whole area now of new science, the science of consciousness, which allows us to understand what multidimensionality is all about. We think on many levels, we see on many levels, we have precognition of thoughts before they are manifested in logical form on many levels. So life works on many levels. The people of ancient India use the word chakra, which means circle, or dynamic wheel. And our body, in terms of biophysics, is a series of 7 basic chakras or energy centers. So as we put East and West science together, we realize that we are a collection of many realities and spinning relationships. We are a wheel of life within a wheel of life. We are cosmic creation on a microbiological level. And the question is not why, but to simply open our eyes, our spiritual eyes, in addition to our physical eye, and realize that we are a completely unified universe, consciously, physically, and spiritually.
What is the space-time overlap, and how might that manifest in our reality?
Well, ultimately, we feel that we exist in this reality right now, but we can tap into other realities. And the alpha frequency, which you get right before you're falling asleep, is a way to tap into that reality. So what are we talking about? Well, we're saying that where we are now and what we think is around us actually is only one, we'll say it's really a small aspect of the fuller, greater reality of life. There are beings, many people have seen ghosts sometimes. Where are they? Well, they're not in this 3rd or 4th dimensional reality, but they're still in our space in a certain sense sometimes, if you see them. In other times, there's other things that people can see precognition. A lot of people know things before they happen. Now, in addition to that, we believe there's vast amounts of reality. People do see angels. People do see beings that come into their room at night. Usually it's a positive. And in fact, I think depending on how we think, and if we do a little prayer at night, doesn't hurt to bring in the right energies around us. And they are waiting and here to help. I've talked to people who have had near-death experiences. And when they hear that about what this reality is all about, they often say, when we listen to our, we could say our higher self or those spiritual guides that are around us, the spiritual guides on the other side all kind of applaud. They're saying, hey, they're listening. They know, we know a little bit more than they do. We're trying to help them. Please. That's what we want to, know. And sometimes you just want to know things that we can't physically know with our logical mind. We can be informed. So a space-time overlap is really where the other side reaches into our reality and we can experience and know it.
So there's a little bit more to that, but I'm conscious I've only got like 5 minutes left, so I'm going to skip ahead. So that was the Hurtax from the Academy of Future Science, talking a little bit about those subjects there. I promised you the advantages. Well, here's one of them. This was me meeting Sam. She's the other side of the world. She lives in America, in Albuquerque. This was us in Glasgow on a Saturday night, the worst time to maybe meet someone in the centre of the town. But that feeling, you're not alone, you know, you speak to somebody, I also see things in my room at night, and oh God, thank goodness, you know, I'm not the only one. Another advantage, when I did the documentary and I put it online, I shared it with the support group where I did, you know, a lot of my interviews and questionnaires and got my data from. And this lady said, you know, I've watched part one, I'm so filled with comfort, joy and excitement. As a human, what better thing can you hear from another human, you know, that somehow you've managed to help them in some way, and you know, and they help you by just telling you their stories and what they're going through. No, it's because I'm going back to the book. No, essentially, you know, again, this idea of creativity, problem solving. This was a map that my dear friend Colgan drew for me. You know, and it's that ripple effect. You know, you have this one bizarre experience in your room. Suddenly, you're writing a book. Suddenly, your friend, she's getting all artistic and she's doing drawings for you. And you know, it's that ripple effect of like how it spreads. This was the prequel novella that I wrote during lockdown, 6 Shamans and a Visionary. So again, just we've got to go quick because I've got 3 minutes. This is where you can find, this is a 2-part documentary. It's sort of free on YouTube. The QR code you might not quite grasp here, but I do have cutouts at the back where you can take, it's got the QR code on it, and you can find it at Hypnagogia Visions by my bed. Techniques, really quick. I mentioned active imagination. This is quite a good technique that people tend to enjoy. Leave it at that for now. The Dali Edison method. Both of these guys, they used to have like I think Dali had like a brass key, and he used to have a metal plate, and when he was dozing, when that key clanked, it would sort of bring him back to consciousness enough to just remember where he just was and what he was seeing, he'd be sketching. And Edison did the same with that ball bearing or something. Just want to give a wee shout out to my friend Matt Chong over at Lucid Explorers. He has got 57 playlists on all sleep-related subjects. So if you are interested in this subject, he's actually got a whole playlist just on Hypnagogia and things like that. So you can check him out. Really lovely guy. He's over in Hawaii. And then finally, so Alan Watts, the philosopher Alan Watts, you know, he spoke frequently about the importance of music, right? And to look at life like a musical experience. It's not about rushing to the end. It's about taking time to be in the present moment and enjoying that vibration and enjoying what's happening in the moment. And really the reason I mention that is because Hypnagogia, it can be something like that as well. You know, it just reminds you to play, you know, it reminds you to kind of linger and be curious and things like that. So, little takeaways from me today. I hope this talk's brought a little bit of awareness on the subject if you didn't know much about it before. I'll be here all day, so please do come and say hello. If you've experienced this or you know someone that has and you've maybe not spoke to anybody about it, please do come and tell me your experience because I would love to hear about it. And finally, you know, for all the kind of intrusiveness and, you know, feeling vulnerable because it's like you're in your pajamas or whatever in this, you know, it can open up an entire world of opportunities, not just creatively, not just problem solving, but I'm talking about personal insight, you know, personal spiritual growth, all that kind of stuff. And that is me, and I just want to thank you very much. Thank you to Alison and the everybody that organised